Welcome, Philippe.
Good afternoon and welcome. Bienvenidos, friends of the Hispanic Society, to a very special event, La Cocina Hispana, or the Hispanic Kitchen. In celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, this special event celebrates one of the lesser-known parts of our library collection, which is a group of rare cookbooks from Spain, Mexico, Brazil, and other parts of Latin America. Thank you once again to our members who have joined us for monthly events since the month of May, and welcome to all of those who are tuning in for the first time. We continue similar conversations, tertulias de arte hispano, on the first Tuesday of each month at 5 p.m. And if you're not a member yet, please do consider joining by going to our website, hispanicsociety.org. You go to membership under support. I should also note that because the first Tuesday of November happens to be election day, the November tertulia will be held instead on the 10th. Additionally, I would like to remind you, our members, that the Hispanic Society is pleased to present the outdoor installation Treasures on the Terrace, which was the subject of an earlier tertulia, and which is open from now until December 6th and consists of kiosks with very large photographic reproductions of works from our collection. The installation includes texts and audio and can also be explored online through our website. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Mark Aldrich, Associate Professor of Spanish at Dickinson College and Executive Director of the Clarke Forum for Contemporary Issues. Professor Aldrich will discuss some of the cookbooks from our library's collection and share some of his experience cooking different types of paellas. We will then share a video tutorial on how to make this popular Spanish rice dish, and the recipe which inspired this particular paella is from a book in the Hispanic Society's collection and shared in the description of this video. We hope you will submit your thoughts and your questions, and maybe even a new recipe, in the comments today. So now, my pleasure to turn it over to Mark Aldrich.
Thank you, Philippe, very much. Good afternoon, everyone who's joining us for what I hope will be an enjoyable conversation about books and food, which is really a wonderful combination. It's really, Philippe, both a pleasure and an honor for me to be able to join you in conversation. And with that, I think I'm just going to share my screen and we'll start talking, excuse me, about the wonderful cookbook collection. So let's see, I need to share screen and going to, okay, so the Hispanic Society's cookbook collection is quite extensive. It's over 1,400 books. Most of them are from the 20th century and into the early 21st century, but there are also approximately 100 books from the 19th and early 20th centuries, some of which are real rare books, very valuable books. And there are also 10 books pre-1830, and these are all really rare and valuable books. The collection covers the width and breadth of Spain, the Caribbean, and Latin America, includes books in various languages, not just Spanish, but also Portuguese, Catalan, Galician, etc. But let's talk very briefly about what I believe to be the oldest book in the Hispanic Society Library's collection, Master Robert's Libre del Coche from 1578. This is the 1578 edition of a book originally published in 1520. So it's not a first edition, but nonetheless, having a cookbook from the 16th century is quite extraordinary. And one of the interesting things to point out is that this is a book about basically what will become Spanish cuisine, but written in Catalan, which I find very interesting. And for scholars, people interested in food studies, it's really a fascinating look at what Renaissance cooking in Europe might be like. So that's a real treasure of this collection. So we also have another jewel of the collection is Martinez Montiño's 17th century book on the arte de cocina, pastelería, bizcochería y conservería. Martinez Montiño was the court cook to Philip IV, and his perspective is really exceptional, being the court cook. And this book is not merely a collection of recipes, but has really interesting information on how Martinez Montiño views hygiene. For example, there's a lot written here about exactly how things should be in the kitchen in order to maintain hygiene. There's information on how to prepare for a court banquet, what things should be served for particular festive events, certain holidays, for example. So it's not just the recipes that no doubt are very interesting, but really gives you a pretty complete view of how people at court ate in the 17th century. Let's jump ahead to the 19th century and to America, in this case, to Mexico, and a very different kind of cookbook. This one by Alejandro Valdés, published in 1831. It's a very different look where the author has a clear readership in mind. He wants to create something that is directed at the women, mainly because he says that, you can see here on this front page, the book is dedicated to Mexican women so that, or for the purpose of offering them a way that is easy and affordable. That's a really interesting concept that is brought in here, the affordability of food preparation. And he says that he wants his readers to be able to cook in the English, Italian, French, and Spanish manners, but doing so using Mexican elements. So it's really interesting. Just on this one page, you can see how there's kind of a new national consciousness about cuisine. And the recipes are really interesting. This is just one page. The recipes are narrative. They do not include lists of ingredients or exact amounts, but they just describe how to prepare the dish. So my conclusion from just the way the book is formatted and organized is that the author is assuming some familiarity already among his readership with the art of cooking in general. And I chose this page because it has here the recipe for the classic Mexican dish, mole poblano. I just decided to include an image of mole poblano, which is often served with rice. And so we can start to think a little bit about rice in Hispanic cuisine and the many, many different forms it takes and its importance. So rice, I think, as we all know, it's an important part of all Hispanic cuisines. And I've put here just a minimal sampling of some of the really basic rice-based dishes that are important to different cuisines around Latin America. And I ended this list with a dessert rice-based dish, arroz con leche, which is popular just about everywhere. So one of the interesting things about rice-based dishes, and maybe we can talk more about this, Philippe, in our conversation, is how people everywhere really often identify very strongly with certain rice dishes. I know several Cubans who have very strong feelings about arroz con gris, Puerto Ricans and Dominicans who have really strong feelings about arroz con habichuelas and how their grandmother made it, and et cetera. So this is something that is in some ways a common denominator to certainly to Hispanic cuisines. Now, I want to speak very briefly about a book which, for the moment, is not a part of the library's collection, and that is this 1857 book, La Cocina Moderna, según la Escuela Francesa y Española. And I wanted to reference this book simply because it turns out to be the earliest documented example of a recipe, a written recipe for paella, even though there are references to paella that are much earlier. And I've read some believe that they go back as far as the 17th century, that there are references to this dish, but it's not until 1857 that we know there's a written recipe for this dish. And coming to much closer to the present, I wanted to go back to the collection and mention this book by Lourdes March, El Libro de la Paella y de los Arroces. This is a book from 1987. It was part of a very popular collection from Alianza Editorial of low-cost paperback books. So this was a big seller in its day. I imagine continues to be so. And I mentioned this book because, as you mentioned in your introduction, this is the book that has a paella recipe which I adapted for the paella, which we will see very shortly in the video, the short video that we're going to share. I also wanted to share just a brief quote from the author's kind of introductory remarks on paella, which I found very interesting. I'm going to read it in Spanish. It's very brief, and then maybe I can paraphrase it in English for audience members who don't understand the Spanish. She says, la preparación de una paella reúne un conjunto de factores que convierten este proceso en una mezcla de rito, fiesta social o familiar, y en ocasiones debate gastronómico, porque cada maestro paellero presente piensa y hasta suele decir que su técnica es la mejor, y en cuanto se duda de su aptitud, se siente enormemente ofendido. I thought so she's saying that making a paella, brings together all these different factors that turn the event into a mix of ritual and social or family festivity, and at times culinary debate. And she mentions how all of the people who make paellas tend to have very strong feelings about their technique and believe that they have the best technique, and can be easily offended if there's any critiquing of how they're doing that. And I've certainly in my own experiences found that to be truth. So I thought that was a very good observation on March's part, and we can come back in our conversation to the kind of ritual and festive aspects of paellas and rice in general. One more brief reference to a book. This is a book published in 2011 by a Spanish chef, Alberto Herraiz. And I just find it very interesting because some of what he presents in this book is pretty unorthodox in terms of both ingredients and technique, especially in terms of technique and process. But again, we can come back to that. Finally, just wanted to mention that the bomba variety of rice would be the standard kind of rice that one would use in making a paella. These are just some images of different paellas I've made, just to give a sense of the variety of things that can go into a paella. On the left is a arroz negro, a paella made with squid ink. On the right is a seafood paella. On the left, you have kind of a mixed paella. And then on the right, we have a paella with some, how do you say it in English? Paellas, scallops and red pepper. And I think there's some monkfish in there, if I recall. And then a couple of big paellas. The one on the right is the one that will be described in the video that's coming up now, I believe. Oh, that's just an image of the saffron going into a saffron that has been steeped in boiling water, being mixed with the rice. We can talk more about that a little bit if time permits in our conversation. And this is just kind of for our entertainment. This is just two aerial shots of what was, and I believe still is, the world's largest paella ever made. These images are from a paella made in Madrid. I believe it was 2003. And the organizers of this huge event claim to have served 110,000 people with this giant paella. Okay, so I think we can go to the video at this point.
Getting ready to start preparing a paella. In this case, a big paella. The sofrito is just the reduction sauce that's an important part of the paella. And then after we do the sofrito, we will start preparing the caldo, the broth, which is the liquid that the rice is going to cook in. Both elements are really very important in terms of the flavors that they will end up contributing to the paella. So although it's these, for example, the sofrito is very simple to do. It's basically going to be just onion, olive oil, pepper, red pepper, and tomato. And we're going to slow cook it, and that's about all there is to it. You can't rush a good paella, that's for sure. don't forget that the pimentón, that's the paprika, is an important, very important part of the sofrito, as it will be essential in adding some very nice flavor to the final paella. As you can see in this list of ingredients, one of the principal deviations from a traditional paella valenciana is the inclusion of seafood. These days, a paella that includes seafood would in Spain typically be referred to as a paella mixta. As we had some really fresh summer squash from our local farm, we decided to include that. Now we have our pan set up. The gas has been started by my great assistant, Andrew Pop. He's controlling the heat we're using 5 different burners. Now we're going to add all the different meats. We're going to spread that around for an even cook. All of that's going to take a good while. And then we're going to add the sofrito. And that combination of meat and sofrito will be essential to the flavor that the rice, which will go in after that, is going to gather that mixture of the sofrito, the oils, and fat that the meat leave in the pan. All of that's going to be absorbed by the rice. So here, all the meats and other ingredients have been absorbing the flavor of the sofrito, getting ready to add the rice. Once the caldo has been added to the pan, the rice takes about 20 minutes to cook. And after that, we're going to let it rest for another 15 minutes or so. There's no limit to what you can put in a paella. We'll talk more about that later. And certainly they lend themselves to large gatherings and the creation of community. And don't forget, you should always use what is freshest and most interesting for you. So watching this video, and now we'll enjoy some nice conversation.
Thank you, Mark, for this mouth-watering presentation. And before I ask you any questions, I should mention that at Dickinson College, aside from your interest in paella, I think what your student derived from most in terms of your knowledge is your expertise in Spanish poetry, the many translations you've made of Spanish and Latin American poets. You're now translating a book by Antonio Soler, and you are also working on poetry translation of the work of Rafael Perez Estrada, who comes from Malaga. I just wanted to clarify some broader professional interest. As to the paella itself, and it is a person who's not exactly known for cooking that is asking these questions. My first is a lexical question. We think of a frying pan or pan in Spanish as a sartén. Here we talk about paella. That is essentially the Valencian word for pan. Is that not the etymology?
That's exactly right, Philippe. So the word paella, which really comes from the Catalan, Valencian, and with its Latin root is referring to that rather flat, round, circular shaped pan. Yeah.
Yeah, so by definition, it's Valencian. Tell me, I mean, these are huge. The one you showed us, how many people does it serve?
The pan that you saw in the video, well, that particular paella was, we were making rice for about up to 200 people. And the pan itself, though, you could max it out at close to 500 servings if you were to really fill it. I think my biggest with that pan has been for about 350.
Well, that begs the question of who are the consumers of these large paellas? Is there, as there is for example, in some places in southern France, a tradition that at the time of weddings or other ceremonies that the whole village, either the parish priest or the mayor, actually would have served the paella to the whole village?
Yes, absolutely. I can't really speak to so much to the involvement of the local parish priest, but it is true that especially in villages, and when a town or village is celebrating, for example, its patron saint, there'll be festivities, and these festivities will often include a community-wide paella because it's just festive and it lends itself to that.
Well, let me ask the question in the opposite way. Is there such a thing as too small for a paella? I mean, is
well, not in it. I mean, I have in our kitchen a tiny paella pan. You could make a paella for 1 or 2 people, and you can in restaurants in Spain and I'm sure around the world, you can sometimes order a paella just for 2 people. I think actually for the person preparing that paella, in some ways it's actually more difficult because there is no room for error in the measurement of your ingredients. It's also, I think, and this is just a personal reaction, I've occasionally made small paellas, but a really small one for 2, there's a certain sadness to it, I think. That, paella really does lend itself to large gatherings and festivity. But no, in theory, you could have a tiny paella pan.
So Mark, you spoke a little bit about meat, and you showed a number of paellas that had clams and seafood in them. The traditional Valencian paella, is that meat or seafood?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Philippe. The basic answer is no seafood. The paella Valenciana, most everyone understands that that's a pretty specific recipe, which includes chicken and rabbit, and it's in the description of the YouTube video here. No pork and no seafood and specific vegetables. However, this 1857 cookbook that has the first documented recipe for paella, it includes pork, sausage, specifically sausage, which I think for people who take kind of a purist view and maybe consider themselves defenders of the authentic paella Valenciana, which would most definitely not include any pork, that's something to reflect on. I'll just give one example that got a lot of media attention. Back in 2016, the British celebrity chef Jamie Oliver apparently published on social media his new paella recipe that included chorizo, and that created, a storm of negative reactions. That the idea of putting chorizo in a paella is just heretical. So there's a whole world of debate out there about what constitutes a paella.
Well, you just used the word world. Let's cross the Atlantic and go to Latin America.
Yeah.
You suggest in the video that there are any number, and in your little chart, of different ways of making paella in Latin America. What are some of those characteristic differences? And you also mentioned saffron.
Right.
That was a de rigueur in every paella.
Well, first, in terms of saffron is certainly traditionally considered a basic ingredient of paella, certainly of paella valenciana. But in reality, you asked me initially about the pan, the word paella, and how it really refers to just the pan. So you could make the argument that any rice dish made in that kind of a pan could, in a certain way, could be considered a paella. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have saffron in your paella, but the saffron does add a very characteristic aroma and flavor to the rice that is considered generally very characteristic of paella. So normally you would have saffron in your paella. In terms of Latin America and even around the world, well, I think people are tending to use what's available locally. So, you might have a paella made in Cuba or other Caribbean islands with yuca or other local vegetables, local fish. So yeah, people are, and because paella has become in recent decades a truly international phenomenon, you'll see all kinds of varieties, but it's always in that pan.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. At this point, I think with quite a few of our members and friends watching, I'd like some perhaps more educated questions about paella and cooking to come from them. So maybe Christina can forward some of the questions for us.
Yes, thank you both so much. We do have a question about the rabbit. So someone is mentioning, I noticed rabbit referenced a lot in today's presentation. It's something I associate with French, but not Spanish food. Did rabbit drop out of Spanish cuisine at some point?
I don't think so. There are a number of dishes in different regional Spanish cuisines that involve rabbit. In the region of La Rioja, there's certainly and any other number of in Castilla, there are quite a number of recipes, dishes that call for rabbit. It's not especially common, and it's also not something that you're going to find real frequently in restaurants these days, but yes, it is definitely a part of Spanish cuisine.
We also have another question about the collection itself. This member is wondering why you think Huntington had cookbooks in the library collection, and how it is exactly that the director, Mitch Cotting, or why you think he decided to donate so many of these cookbooks to the library collection.
Well, that's a really interesting question. And my knowledge of this is certainly not direct, but it's certainly, Huntington wrote about his ideas and his vision for the Hispanic Society and his wish to make available the materials that would give access to Hispanic and Hispanic cultures. So not only the marvelous art collection that constitutes the core of the museum, and not only the great literary works that are so important to the library collection. So, I think most people think of that combination of visual arts and literature as the collection, but and that's the heart of it. But it goes beyond that to any kind of object or book, in this case, that would improve a visitor's ability to get a sense of the richness of Hispanic cultures. And cookbooks really do that. Okay, they can teach you so much about a culture. And so I think it's that kind of generally ethnographic vision of learning how a given people live at a given time. Certainly how people eat is a big part of that. And I suspect that Mitchell was also, following that kind of reasoning in making that really generous donation. Just a basic part of understanding culture.
Thank you. And on a similar note, could you talk about the political dimension of some of these cookbooks a bit? Were there any nationalist connotations to certain dishes or ingredients that changed recipes over time?
Well, that's a really great question. And I don't have, I'm no expert on this collection. And cookbooks are not my field. So all I can do is take a guess that there must be, if someone were to go in and to really go through these books, that you would come up with things that have a political intentionality, at least in terms of maybe developing a certain vision, a political ideology's vision of how a people should be in terms of their symbols, in terms of certain iconic elements of their culture, and food and recipes play a part of that, and ingredients, because we associate certain foods with certain cultures. But again, I don't have any, I can't give you specific examples. But certainly there are cookbooks that respond to that try to further the idea of a national cuisine or a regional cuisine that might be anti-nationalist, or in these days, there are other cookbooks that try to absolutely break down the notion of national cuisines and show us that looking at gastronomy in national terms maybe is not the only way of looking at it.
Wonderful, thank you. And we do have another question about ingredients and about thinking about specific holidays, perhaps related to paella. So are you aware of any holidays in Spain, or any particular times of year or even time of day when you would serve a paella, or is this dish served year round for many different holidays and celebrations?
Well, I would say in Spain, which is where I'm certainly most knowledgeable and where paella is most part of real culture. Not so much I don't believe there's a concrete relationship with specific holidays per se. And also, we need to keep in mind that most Spaniards are not consuming paella at home in their kitchen. They're going out and they're usually going out to have paella during the daytime, not always, but that's much more frequent than having a paella late at night when people are having dinner. So it's usually going to be the midday meal. In the warmer months, it's going to be more frequent because people like to be outside, but you can get a really good paella at any time of year. But there is, I would say, an association with family celebrations, birthdays, anniversaries, first communions, things that are going to bring together family and extended family really lend themselves to a paella.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead, Philippe.
One question that sort of picks up on the one about Latin America, and it has to do with what really constitutes the character of what is a paella. There are many dishes in Latin America, certainly many in Mexico, that are arroz con something.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does arroz con something becomes a paella? What is missing in the arroz con pollo, arroz con something? Doesn't make it a paella.
Well, I think it's the above all the pan, and because the pan is not just because of having to conform to your lexical accuracy, but the steaming rice in a tall cylindrical pot that's covered is going to create something that in texture and flavor is just essentially different from cooking rice in an open pan. And traditionally, we should clarify that, again, the traditionalists would even insist that a paella has to be done over a wood fire. And doing it the way I typically do it with a gas powered flame is, well, that's not really traditional, but it's not easy, not easy to get a wood fire all the time. But in any case, I think that would be kind of, for me, the limit if it's not made in the pan. But to your question, Philippe, I think it's really interesting the way, and again, this is not something I've studied, but maybe it could be a project for retirement. I think serious students of food, people who might be in food studies programs, really have a project in terms of studying rice in its social dimensions, because it so much lends itself to preparing large quantities. It's just not that difficult to make a lot of rice. And so that is, connects it to the association with both ritual and above all, festivity and community, because you're bringing lots of people together. And I believe, again, this is nothing I've studied, but when people say in Spanish from wherever they're from in the Spanish-speaking world, is that arroz con, there can be such strong connotations and identifications with family, with celebration. And I think that's just a really interesting dynamic.
Well, I think that answers very well my question. My last one, and is rather ordinary sort of question. Seeing how much broth, sofrito, there is, do you use a fork or a spoon to eat paella?
A fork. Oh, well, typically, although, again, going back to this, the traditionalists in Valencia would say that the really traditional way is to, and everyone without individual plates, just everyone taking a wooden spoon and going right into the pan. Honestly, I rarely see that. So, but there are different, and I have seen, and I've made myself, for example, arroz caldoso, a more liquidy rice, but in the paella pan. And for that, you would use a spoon. But what most people call a paella would be consumed with a fork. Yeah, absolutely.
Christina, before I close the program, are there any other questions from our members?
Yes, we have one last burning question from a member, and that has to do with the bomba rice that you mentioned. So this is a question that's also practical. Do you happen to know if the specific bomba rice is available in the US to purchase? And is that rice, does it come from the region of Valencia? Is it grown there?
Bomba rice is grown principally in Valencia and Murcia, which is just south of Valencia. It could be grown not anywhere, anywhere where you could grow that kind of rice. It's referring to a specific variety of rice. Unlike, for example, one of the perhaps the most popular rice for people who take paella seriously is Calasparta rice. Calasparta is a specific municipality, and it has its particular qualities, but Calasparta is a bomba rice. That's the variety. More importantly, yes, it is pretty easily available these days for purchase. You can buy it. It's easy to buy it online, and sometimes you will see it at these big supermarkets that have maybe an international food section. The important thing is, and the reason people use bomba rice, not only tradition, but its ability to absorb liquid is extraordinary. So if you try to make a paella following a recipe, for example, that calls for arroz bomba, but you're using a different kind of rice, be careful, because the absorbing qualities of the different varieties of rice are not going to be the same. So, for example, our Bordeaux rice is pretty similar. It's also a medium grain rice like bomba rice, and it's an acceptable alternative. Some people, oh no, you can't do that, but it's not that different. But it doesn't. Our Bordeaux's ability to absorb liquid is not quite the same as bomba rices, so you're going to have to adjust the proportions just a little bit. That's the one part of, I think I've said it probably more than once in this conversation, that you can put all kinds of things in a paella. So in that sense, there's lots of room for experimentation, improvisation, etc. One thing you cannot improvise is the ratio of liquid to rice. That has to be really exact. And that, I think for a lot of people who are interested in paella, is what is going to determine the success of your paella. Did you get the rice has to be cooked just right. If it's undercooked, it's no good. If it's overcooked, it's no good. And this all depends on getting the ratio of liquid to rice just right.
Well, I'm glad that question was asked. I think that's a very important element of the making of paella. I think on that note, that we've reached pretty much the amount of time we devote to our conversations, our tertulias, and I'm very grateful to you, Mark, for this presentation and mouth-watering, as I said earlier. And I'm very grateful for our members to have joined us in this very special tertulia. We're thrilled with our community of supporters. We hope that it will continue to grow and to swell like the rice in a paella. And remember to sign up for our newsletter to join as a member of the Hispanic Society. and we will let you know more in that way about our tertulia on the 10th of November. Remember, not the 3rd because of Election Day, and it will be with curator Patrick Lenigan. And so thank you all again, and I, for one, am rushing somewhere to eat something that at least is close to a paella if I can. So thank you all very much, and see you on the 10th of November.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.